As part of my day-to-day role, I advise a lot of leaseholders on the lease extension process, and a very common question at the moment in 2025 is, should I wait for marriage value to be abolished? It's a really difficult one to answer, particularly because it's quite a personal question, and a lot of it is based upon somebody's appetite for risk, so the potential upside that marriage value could be abolished, maybe in the next year or 2 years, or possibly even 3, and then that brings down the lease extension premium significantly, perhaps by a half or even more. However, the downside is that there are certainly some leaseholders that have been waiting since the announcements were first made in 2020 about leasehold reforms, and we're quite far down the line since then, and then they've been forced to proceed anyway, perhaps because they need to sell the property or remortgage, and in those circumstances it's a real shame that the lease has got shorter, property prices has gone up, and that's pushed up the lease extension premium. So now the equation may be shifting slightly because we've got other promises from the government, such as the removal of recoverable freeholders' legal costs. And given that they can usually be somewhere between £2,000 to £3,000, that's another pretty big incentive to wait for the law to change. However, in all cases, it is a very personal question. Might there be an urgent need to sell? And then could we end up paying more if we don't proceed now? Do we even have to pay marriage value at the moment? Because if you've got more than 80 years on the lease, there is certainly a good argument to get on and proceed now before marriage value kicks in, because even if it is abolished, there is some talk that there could be a bit of a trade-off and there might be something else that gets added into the calculation. It's very much a valuation point, and valuation surveyors will be able to go into it in a lot of detail, but from the legal side of things, it's important for me to say to people that this is what the law is as it stands, and at the moment there's no guarantee that the reforms will come in as they've been promised, although I'm quite optimistic because we've already had some pretty significant changes this year with the removal of the 2-year rule, and in a separate but related issue, the removal of landlords' costs on right to manage claims. So I'm hopeful that later this year we're going to see some more positive changes, but as to whether or not one person should proceed, there's probably a list of a dozen variables that need to be sat down and gone through. And I hope that this blog post sets out some of the questions that you can work through to see if it's going to be useful to wait, or actually, given the lease length and your personal circumstances, if it is worth proceeding now, because perhaps the benefits may not be as great in some circumstances.